Hi everyone, welcome to Psychedelic Conversations. This is your hub for engaging in deep conversations around serotonergic hallucinogens that alter perceptions, affect cognitive processes, induce mystical and spiritual experiences. Enjoy the show. Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of the Psychedelic Conversations Podcast. Great to see you guys, and I have a very special guest from the Peruvian Amazon, and his name is Jason Grechanik. Hope I pronounced it well, Jason. I'm sure you will tell us how to pronounce it in a moment, and I'm really excited to welcome you on this show today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. And yes, you pronounced it correctly.
Awesome. Before we dive in, I do have some questions and some of the concepts that I would like to check in with you and talk about with you. But first of all, just to introduce you to my listeners, from what I know, from what I've been observing, and you have a very successful podcast, The Universe Within, which I became a huge fan of recently, which will add links and all the contacts to you for our listeners. It's become my go-to podcast now, and it's just incredible. The concepts and the educational and information, all of these things that you share is great with your guests, and I'm just so happy that I found you, because I feel like we need to know more. I think we need to learn more, especially coming from the West, coming from the Western mindset. I think we really need to know more about the psychedelics and also plant medicines and entheogens, however we want to refer to them. But I think it's a great time now to dive into the education. But before we go into that, please tell us your story. How did you end up in the middle of the plant medicine space and also facilitation and everything that you do? Can you give us a bit more information? How, and also tell us right now where you are and your projects, all those things we want to know.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me, Susan. It's always one of these questions. I'm never sure exactly where to start, but I would say, I think one thing that really influenced me is when I was younger, my father was very interested in cultures from around the world, and I think especially cultures that hadn't been touched so much from the outside world. So I grew up being very fascinated with that. I grew up in the US, and from a very young age, I was very fascinated with the Native American cultures. And then when I would say probably in my late teens, early 20s, I became really interested in, for lack of a better word, spirituality. And I really began kind of just immersing myself in all of these different teachings, from yoga and Taoism and Native American philosophies, Vedic thought. And I felt like there was something in all of these teachings that I was looking for. And I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but I felt from a lot of these ancient or esoteric teachings that they were all pointing to something very similar. And I had a sense of it, and I began a lot of different practices like yoga and martial arts, Tai Chi, Qigong, a lot of different things. And then at some point, I ended up doing a really long trip, which is a whole nother story. But in that trip, I found myself in Asia for a long time, and again, learning about a lot of these practices. And I'd always been really interested in shamanism, and I spent some time in Mongolia, and I think certain experiences I had there really began to open me up. And then I was living in New York, and I had been there, I think, for 10 or 11 years, and I just had this deep felt sense that I needed to get out of there. I mean, I think some was like literal. I felt like I was dying in a way, but probably more metaphorical, although I'm sure to some degree it was physical as well. But I had heard of this plant medicine, ayahuasca, which most people, I'm sure, are familiar with now. And I had a friend who was in the Santo Daime Church, which is a really big Brazilian organization that works with ayahuasca. But I never really felt so called to work with it. So I'd known about it for a long time. And then just kind of things serendipitously started happening, and it started coming to me more. And I just felt this at one point, a very deep calling to go and to work with it. And so I wanted to go to where the source was, the Amazon jungle. I went to a really large plant healing center there, and it was an amazing experience. It really opened me up to, I think, a lot of the things I'd been learning and studying about, but on a very experiential level. And I think for the first time, and this is a really common theme, I think, in a lot of these spiritual traditions, this idea of Maya or Vipassana, or even a Christian concept of apocalypse, which is often, it's been very mistranslated as to the end of the world, but the actual meaning of it, very much like Maya, is to lift the veil and to see the world as it actually is, not how we want it to be or how we think it is, through the lens of our own patterns and beliefs and upbringing. So it really opened me to a different way of seeing things and experiencing reality. And so it was something I wanted to explore deeper. And again, it was kind of serendipitous, because at the time the place I went to was looking for someone to come down and to teach some different modalities, things like yoga, meditation. And again, I had this like deep knowing that I needed to get out of New York. And so kind of I put two and two together, and I was like, okay, well, this is the opportunity. So I came down to the jungle. I was working in this place for a long time, and I really started to go deep into that work through working with it myself a lot, working with ayahuasca, beginning to work with other people. I started doing a process of dieting plants, which is in the Amazon. It's one of the traditional ways that people really begin to learn from plants, is through an experiential ingesting of plants. There's this word like psychedelic, which, has a lot of different connotations. I think the real meaning of it is very beautiful, which is the mind made manifest, or the mind revealed. And I think to that degree, all of these plants do that. Some have become much more well known because they or San Pedro. And then many of the plants are much more subtle. They're working on much more subtle layers. So I went into a really deep process of that, dieting different plants, especially doing a lot of work with tobacco, which became a really big part of my path. And I just never really left the jungle. That was 10 years ago now, almost. And so for the past decade, pretty much, I've been living and working and continuing to learn. And it's just kind of been a natural evolution of beginning to work with these things myself, and then eventually starting to work with other people. And but yeah, I mean, I think it really, more than anything, it just came from a deep desire or curiosity to know myself, to know my place in the world, to try and understand, what is all of this? Why are we here? What are we doing? And I think a lot of these ancient or esoteric practices are really trying to get at the root of that. And, which ultimately I think is a sense of peace, a sense of contentment, a sense of a belonging in the world, a sense of a connection, and a sense that there's there is a deep meaning to life, and beyond just what the sensory perceptions that we have kind of show us on a daily basis. That there's many layers underneath that, and it's a beautiful, fascinating, scary, terrifying, amazing journey when we go into that.
Yeah. Yeah, that's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing. So would you say that you are now facilitator, shaman? I don't know if these concepts are right to say, or how would you describe yourself? Are you a curandero? What are those concepts?
Yeah. I usually kind of avoid those just because they tend to have a lot of, I think, excess meaning behind them. My main teacher, for example, he wouldn't call himself those, and he, of all the people I know, embodies all of those qualities more than anyone I know. But I think there's a real reason he avoids them. If anything, he would call himself a guide, and I think to some sense that's maybe where I find myself. My friend Claude, who I've interviewed, he uses a really beautiful term, which is bridge keeper. And I see myself in that role more, which is, how to take these ideas, these practices, because it really is a different way of looking and understanding the world. And it's not foreign to any of us. It's inherent. We're all human. We all, as my friend Amika, who I've also done a podcast with, explains it very beautifully in his line. It's this story that we all come in the primordial anaconda canoe. And so we all carry a piece of that, and we all carry a piece of these medicines. But, certainly in this day, especially with how small the world has become and how knowledge has become so condensed, there is a certain way of looking at the world that's become very predominant. And I think in many ways we've lost some of these other ways of naming things, of defining things, of stories, of myths, of legends, which have a tremendous impact. Even as kids, we read these tales, these children's stories, and they're very powerful. And there's a reason we tell those, or traditionally, at least, we told those to kids, is because it actually begins to shape how they look at the world. And if all we're taught is that, like what I see and touch is real, then that literally shapes our reality. But if we're given stories or tools or plants that can reshape that then becomes our world. So yeah, I mean, part of my work is facilitating plant medicine ceremonies, working with indigenous people who hold these traditions very strongly, kind of, again, being the bridge between that. Also, with my own evolution now, I've started, with the blessing of my teachers, giving these plants. So I've stepped into that role of, I guess, what could be called a curandero. But ultimately, I think they're all really, it's the same path. It's essentially trying to aid people in their own evolution.
I love that. Beautiful. And how do you feel about these plant medicines or the teacher plants becoming a trend? Because what I'm observing, being in London and being, of course, from this side of the world, that where you are, I'm observing a lot of, especially social media, people on social media, and this whole plant medicine is becoming a trend somehow. It's becoming I heard of psychedelic tourisms, ayahuasca tourism. I've heard of this concept, which kind of disturbing in a way. And also I've heard that a lot of the people are sort of in competition to become a shaman, facilitator, or a curandero, as we do things in the West, you know how it is with the civilized world. We're always in this competitive, this nature of competition. And it's almost like I hear a lot of stories which are quite disturbing again, somebody just kind of attending to a few ceremonies and then claiming to be a facilitator, and so on and so forth. In your work, how do you deal with this? And one thing I would like to say is that what I love about the bridge keeper, or one of my favorite concepts, is the wisdom keeper. I feel like we've lost this over time. If we go back to the ancient times, there's always elders that always, also called the wisdom keepers, that kind of pass it on to the generations, and they tell these stories that you mentioned earlier to the grandchildren, and then to their children, and so on and so forth. So I feel like a lot of the authentic facilitators and shamans, these are all different terms, but we understand what it means. They're all wisdom keepers in a way, and to become a wisdom keeper, there is a lot of work beforehand to get to that level of bridge keeper or wisdom keeper. And of course, what do you see if you are observing the same things that I am, in terms of this whole thing becoming a trend, and it's also empty, also becoming an empty shell? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think everything you said is really true. It's, in an ultimate sense, there's a lady who I like a lot. Her name is Byron Katie, and she has a very simple teaching. But something she says is really beautiful. And she says, when you fight reality, you lose, but only 100% of the time. And I think that's really, really profound. What the direction the world is moving ultimately, in a larger sense, is always good. I mean, that's the only thing it can be. It may have, of course, drawbacks in the moment. That there's always going to be challenges. There's going to be fights. Like before we started recording, you're mentioning there's protests in London, and the policies that are happening, we could label potentially as bad, but a good is that there's a resistance, there's an awakening that comes from that. So we can never know how things happen in a larger picture, why they're happening. That's that's kind of reserved for God in a way, something that's beyond the mind. And we can try and figure those things out, and we can come up with really good theories and beliefs, but ultimately it's in the realm of the unknown. And that's where trust and faith come in. And those words, especially faith, have become really kind of taboo words in our culture, because it means you can't understand it, and that's deemed very not good. If you can't understand it, it means it's not real. It means it doesn't exist. And yet, in an ultimate sense, the mind is limited to what it can know. It's limited to itself. And in Zen, they say it really beautifully, which is the knife. It can cut everything. It can cut all things. Anything can be cut with a knife. And yet a knife can never cut itself. And in that way, it's like the mind. Like the mind can know potentially anything that's made manifest, but it can never know itself. It can never know what's beyond the mind. So, I think in an ultimate sense, it's trusting these things. And I think it's beautiful that these plants are becoming more well-known. In an ultimate sense, that's good. I think there's a symbiotic relationship, that the reason they're spreading is because there's a deep need for them. There's a suffering, there's a longing that people are experiencing, and they're finding solace in these plants. They're finding teaching, they're finding healing, they're finding connection. And that's a beautiful thing. And like with anything, there's this pendulum effect, and it's going to go to an extreme, and there's going to be damage, and there's going to be side effects. But then how do we bring that pendulum back into a balance and find that more holistic way of working with them? I think there's really there's something symbiotic that's happening. The needs of humans are very much in this time now being answered by plants, and I think really a big part of that is because we've lost that. These plants they've never gone away. It's just we've lost the connection with them. We've gone in another direction, and now, in a sense, we're beginning to remember. We're beginning to come home. We're beginning to rediscover our own inherent traditions. None of these things are foreign to us. They're at the root of all the cultures we come from. That's why it's been said many ways, but truth is one and paths are many, but the truth is one, and all of these things are pointing towards that. So of course, with that, all sorts of things are going to come up. And for a long time, for example, here in the jungle, these plants were really being lost. Those traditions were being lost because people didn't want to do the work. They didn't want to spend a year, 2 years, 3 years, in isolation, fasting, not having sex, barely eating, because that's very difficult. And if there's no kind of light at the end of the tunnel, nobody wants your help. Well, why are you going to do that? And so it took, rare individuals who really wanted to dedicate themselves to that path. Obviously, as this work spreads and becomes more monetized and more acceptable, that's a beautiful thing. But of course, there's the other side of that, of as you said, people who may want to profit more from the rewards than from the process itself. But there's nothing you can really do about that. That's just, again, something that's naturally going to happen. And then that's something we have to, as individuals, as collectives, as societies, come to ways in which we deal with that. I'm sure that's why when we look at like Western medicine, it's a very long process to become a doctor. You have to go through all these trials and tribulations and study and practice. And then at the end, you get a diploma, which is, in a way, it's a good thing. It's like when you go to a doctor's office and you see that diploma, like, he's at least gone through some sort of training. With this work, that's not there. And whether that's a good thing to have or not, I don't know. I mean, that's debatable, but, a lot of this work has been lost. It's been persecuted. It's been lost out of a lack of interest, and now it's coming back. So, that's going to be, again, up to people, societies to decipher, how to best do that, who actually is qualified of doing that. What does that mean to do that? And, certainly it's a really common thing now. People come down and they go to an ayahuasca ceremony and they think they're enlightened and they want to share this medicine. And often that's coming from a really good place. They've been genuinely changed and they want to share. But again, I think a really good analogy is like a Western doctor. You can have a beautiful experience, and that can hopefully lead you on a path of maybe going down that, but it's not something you can just do right away. Ultimately, it is something that's very skilled. And, even when you ask me about titles, even though I've been doing this work for 10 years, there's still many, many things I don't know. I feel like a baby, an infant in knowledge, and it's a continuous path. And so, kind of a long answer, but basically to summarize, I think ultimately it's good that these plants are spreading, that this knowledge is spreading, because it's something we need. It's something that's always coexisted as part of being a human being. It's actually, it's what it means to be a human being. And so it's beautiful that we're rediscovering that. And then with that, there's going to be all sorts of issues that then we have to deal with as well.
That's beautiful. Thanks for sharing that. Your answer reminded me of the webinar that I watched from Rick Doblin, MAPS Canada, the founder of MAPS Canada, as you know. And I think the question was to him, because of the research and now science is stepping in and they're having these incredible studies and research results. Biotech companies are moving in fast. Like you said earlier, there's going to be a lot of people trying to exploit or even turn it into profit. And the question was, what do we do with all these biotech companies moving in so fast and using them as an investment how it is for money and to grow and to turn them into profit. And his answer was, well, let them, because it's going to be much easier to get these medicines legalized or decriminalized if they move in fast. That was it really surprised me, because what I'm observing in so many psychedelic forums and communities, a lot of people are almost in a protest mode. They want to protest these biotech companies. And then Rick Doblin comes in and says, no, let them, because they are more powerful. They have a say, they have authority, and they can only help us get the message out. So I thought your answer to my question about, people claiming to be shamans after a few ceremonies, it's very similar. So what I find is that people who genuinely, authentically practice plant medicines or any psychedelic medicines for healing purposes, to make impact, or actually genuinely help people, they have this very objective outlook, and they don't hold sides either. It's fine, because also there's this trust. I always tie it to the trust. I think a lot of people who have done a lot of work with these medicines, they have this profound connection and trust to the unfolding, that there is not much of a panic or worry, that everything will be fine. It's almost like one of my online mentors, Caroline Mace, she's a theologian, and she says, all is well, either way. So I think that's an immense faith, and having that trust is incredible to see. So I think when he answered everybody this, that's fine, there was a sign and a relief even inside of me, because this also something that I've been pondering on, and I'm thinking maybe they are helping the movement, maybe they are pushing the decriminalization. Hopefully they will help us get to those people who actually need these medicines. And just wanted to say that. So it's very kind of this is my observation from people that come from a genuine plant space. They really think it's okay. We don't need to react. We don't need to protest. And we don't need to take sides. Yeah.
Yeah, and there's a balance to everything, and it's ultimately, if a biotech company comes in and produces results, great. My sense is that's probably not going to happen to the degree that we think, because that's not how these plants have been worked with. It's not one alkaloid where if you take that alkaloid, all of your problems go away. If it was that easy, that's what the traditions would be pointing towards. They would just give you an alkaloid and that's it. But none of the ones that I know of work that way. There's a worldview around the work. There's stories. There's practices. There's training. There's deep knowledge, a deep process that one has to enter in. And if it was just that easy, if you just take an alkaloid and all your problems go away, well, then all of our problems would be gone. But that's not the case. And a lot of that comes from, I often don't like to use this word, but kind of this more Western way of looking at things, that, X equals Y and Y equals Z. And if I do this, then I get that. And many things do work that way. But many things don't work that way. They're not that simple. And if it is that simple, then great. Then there's no problem. But, all of these traditions have a tremendous amount of wisdom to share. And if we kind of have this arrogance that we know better, that, we can look under a microscope and just find the one thing that encapsulates all of this knowledge and all of this meaning, well, great. But obviously that hasn't worked. That's why we're looking again to these more ancient ways of being, is because that way it's progressed as tremendously. There's tremendous beauty in that. We're sitting here now, you're I guess in London, I'm in Peru, and we're being able to share, and many people, hopefully will be able to benefit from that. That's amazing. That comes from, 1 + 1 = 2. That's incredible. but that's not the entire world. There's many things that aren't explained that easily. And so many of these traditions, you can't just extrapolate one thing and think that you're going to get the essence from that. I think a lot of that also comes from the way the world is moving, which is very much this like instant gratification. Like, oh, I'm going to take ayahuasca one weekend and I'm going to be fine. Probably not. It could be. And if that happens, wonderful. But these things take work and they take real dedication, and it takes, it takes a genuine desire also. And it's like anything. If two people, take sports as an example. If I've done, if I've done sports my whole life and I'm eating really well and training and my dedication is super focused and I get up early and I do all these things and I go to this new sport, and then someone else who's been sitting on the couch all day eating potato chips, drinking beer, watching TV, then they go to that same sport. Are we going to be in the same place? No. And that would be foolish to think that, so it's the same thing with this work. It's not that just, anyone can take it and experience the same results. No, there's all sorts of other things that go into that. And that's where the dedication comes in, the real, the faith, the desire to really want to heal, the desire to really want to understand the root of our problems. And that's something a lot of these plants for me and from my work with other people really points towards is, we live in this society where it's so easy to like point the finger, like, it's this person's fault. It's the corporation's fault. It's capitalism's fault. It's the skin color's fault. It's the gender's fault. It's my parents' fault. It's my ex-girlfriend's fault. It's my ex-boyfriend's fault. It's everyone, but we forget about us. Like, where do we fit into that? And for me, these plants are really a journey into self-knowledge, into self-inquiry. And while all of these other things are important, they have a place in our life, we can't omit the root of all of that, which is us. And so these things really take us on a very deep journey into that. And, in an ultimate sense, as you were saying, I guess to tie this back, yes, all is well in an ultimate sense. But it's, that's not just a saying that we can kind of use as a mantra and our life is going to change. It only works when we really go in and begin to see, what is not well within me, what is in a state of dis-ease within my body, within my mind, within my emotions, within my connection to spirit. And as I begin to see that and I begin to bring harmony to that, then I can begin to say, okay, yes, like, in a deeper sense, like things are well, things are how they should be. But that's not to say we just, sit in a cave and, have a mudra and chant all is well. No, it takes action. It takes doing. So yeah, I guess long answer, but, I think there's a lot of validity in what Rick is saying. I think the only downside of that too is it's super important, again, that we do respect where these things came from, because they exist within that context and they can't just be taken out without also understanding the context with which they're in. And that's not to say we shouldn't try, because if it works, again, great. But my sense is it's not going to work in that way. We have to take, the other things that accompany those. And that's where this, I think a lot of protests that you were talking about from people is valid in the sense that, we have to understand these things in a deeper sense, where they came from, the cultures that brought them to us. And then also, we can't get stuck in the stagnancy of these things are static, because none of these cultures are static as well. They're also constantly evolving and changing and growing. And so it's always that dance between the two polarities, the dance for change and knowledge and trying to find the essence, while at the same time trying to understand and honor the traditions in which they came from.
Yeah, that's beautiful. Always. Currently, I am sort of paying more attention to, or at least cultivating this idea that there is this psychedelic discipline, meaning I do like the term psychedelic, and I don't know how other people are using this term, but for me, it's exactly what you said in the beginning of our conversation. It's about the mind manifesting. And for that reason, I like the term psychedelics. And currently, I've been paying a lot of attention on the psychedelic discipline. And I want to tie this in with what you said. Yes, all is well, but there is work to be done. And, it's not about taking one psilocybin high dose or ayahuasca ceremony, but also putting the work in. And I think in the West, a lot of our struggles is not being able to relate to what that work is. And you and I, we both know this because of what it entails to do work, because, I also have a background with the medicines, but I also have a holistic background, psychotherapy background, where I know that the moment there is a fear or there is a moment of a discomfort, we shut down. We don't want to go there. And then we can find millions of excuses and why not, millions of justifications why we shouldn't. I think, one of the, coming back to the concept of not really understanding the work. What is that? What does it look like to do the work? It's very interesting that there's so many people. I still get a lot of questions of, what do you mean? Like, how do I start? What does that look like? And so lately I've been paying a lot of attention on cultivating somehow a psychedelic discipline, which entails, I'm sure you understand, earlier you said about working in retreats with offering yoga, offering maybe meditation, offering these other esoteric disciplines so that they all come together and support the whole process. And I was thinking, if we look at the esoteric traditions, for example, meditation and fasting was something that, like, it was a foundation in their self-inquiry or self-work or deepening their connection to themselves. So I felt like maybe we need to bring tangible processes to the Western world where people can really actually understand the work that we always talk, because I feel like there is a division. There's a lot of people who's started their journey with plant medicine and they really get the work because they put the time in and the years. And then there is a new wave of people who are now hearing about the medicine and now interested in the medicine. And in some communities, it's really interesting for me to read that there are still questions of, what can I do in an ayahuasca ceremony not to purge because I heard it's purgative, something like that, right? So so this, coming back to this psychedelic discipline, I'd like to think that you probably value a lot of these tools and practices that could support the whole process in itself. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think within a lot of the centers here that work with plants, especially kind of catering more to foreign people who are, working with indigenous cultures, but also having like facilitation, again, kind of that bridge so that people can relate in a way and communicate and be able to share, and combining these other practices. I think that's something that a lot have seen as very important, and usually they would use the word integration. Like, how do you take what you learn and integrate it back into your life? And with this idea of integrity, wholeness, how do we become whole? How do we take what we learned and merge it into our lives so that our lives are whole, so that we're happy. We're not in a state of dis-ease. We're in a state of ease. And that can be very challenging. I think it's the Gospel of Thomas. He says really beautifully something along the lines of, when in order to find, you have to seek. But when you seek, you're going to be terrified. But when we transcend that, then we can stand in awe. And I think that's just an inevitable part of the process. It's kind of like opening Pandora's box. We find ways to seemingly make us happy, whether it's through buying things, relations, sex, adventure, extreme sports, whatever it is, Netflix, ice cream. But most people, I think, have some sense that, something isn't quite right. Like, I'm not really happy on a deep level. There are things that make me happy. I enjoy being around family and friends and their activities, but there's something maybe that's missing. And, we can continue to kind of put Band-Aids over and to find ways to dance around that question. But ultimately, I think it's something we all have to come to terms with. For some of us, that may be on our deathbeds. If we've ever been around someone who's dying, sometimes that's a very difficult process. You can see kind of the pain or the coming to terms with things, the deep sense of self-inquiry. And then some people maybe have done that work, and on their deathbed, they go really peacefully. But we have to do it at some point, whether we want to or not. And so I think when we begin to open that Pandora's box, it can be very difficult. And so that can be a really common thing is people come and they work with ayahuasca, and then it kind of shakes their world up. And then, like, what do I do with that? And that's where you were saying is having a practice can be really beneficial, and it's going to be very individual because we're all different. We all need different things. But having something that we can kind of incorporate what we've learned into our daily lives. It could be yoga, it could be meditation, it could be gardening, it could be a sport, it could be some sort of volunteering work. It could be, working with these plants on a regular basis. I mean, there's so many things, but a way to begin to connect with these things that we learn, because ultimately these plants are teachers. They're, I would say the healing is more of a byproduct because we all need healing to some degree. But ultimately what they're trying to do is to teach us to be whole, to be happy, to feel loved, to be able to love. And so how do we take those teachings, those principles that we learn, and how do we cultivate those? And again, that's going to be very different for different people. That's why the world is so beautiful, because it's so diverse. Every person is unique. There's so many different paths. There's so many different things we can do. But finding a way to begin to integrate that. And that's not always going to be easy. There's going to be ups and downs and lefts and rights. And there's going to be times where we feel amazing. There's going to be times where we think, I have no fucking idea what I'm doing. That's all normal. That's natural. And it's just, continuing to put one foot in front of the other, continuing to follow the principles of these things and to move forward. I mean, that's life. Life is the greatest teacher. Life is the greatest integrator. But finding things that are conducive to our wellness, to our wholeness.
Yeah, again, another beautiful insights. So one of my favorite things that I like pondering on is currently with the social media, advancement and living this digital age, I'm again observing a lot of people just seeking that optimal, result. Optimal. It's all about optimizing, hacking, biohacking, optimizing everything, automating. Because we don't want to ever feel a sad day. We don't want to. I'm glad you mentioned, like, sometimes even the most experienced journeyer, plant medicine worker, can be lost, and it's fine. It's almost like we just reject this idea of, if you've been on a plant medicine journey for 10 years, then you should be all figured everything out. So you should be always happy. I know this is silly, but there is this unconscious belief that drives many of us into continually seeking this image, this perfect image, far out, almost unreachable. But we're thriving we're driven every day, this crazy motivation to get there, but it's probably not even there. and that we will reject everything that comes with this whole process of getting there. And that, I mean, a lot of us are obsessed with, this whole influencer concept. Like if you're online and if you're sharing wisdom, if you're sharing any teaching, it's almost like, you cannot make any mistakes anymore. And people are just watching. And there is this really intense restriction around this, I observe, and that somehow we've forgotten what it's like to be human. And being human is just messy, right? It's just, we're just, the bodies, we have these emotional states that like waves, and we're just so complex. And somehow we have this idea that we can wire ourselves to be optimized for 100% success, 100% happiness, 100%, no failure. And I, also know that the plants do the exact opposite for us, to really show us, no, come back to your center. This is not about this perfect image. I think from my experience and from my observation, a lot of people who take ayahuasca, they're sometimes disappointed because of this real truth that's just, been shown, or at least they understood. What are your thoughts on that? Do you struggle with people coming to you for, as a guide? Do you see these common patterns? So be interested to find out.
Absolutely. And again, I think ultimately everyone is looking for wholeness. They're looking for love. They're looking for connection. They're looking for a sense of peace. And, certainly like this idea of social media and influencing, a lot of that I think is coming from that same thing. People are looking for a sense of connection. And in this kind of digital world we're living in, especially like with the whole pandemic, people are really isolated. And we post something on social media, and the Facebook likes go, or the Instagram likes and comments, and it seemingly fulfills that sense of that sense of longing, that sense of connection. And yet, very often it's coming from a place of suffering, of a deep, inadequacy. And, if I'm posting a picture of me having a beautiful meal and the hashtag is like, beautiful meal, well, that's false in a way, because in that moment, I'm not having a beautiful meal. I'm taking a photo. I'm on my phone. And if I'm really having a beautiful meal, then I'm having a beautiful meal. I'm not taking a photo and saying I'm having a beautiful meal. The experience itself is the beauty. And so that's what I see from everyone. I mean, everyone comes down with their own stories, whether it's deep trauma they've had, not feeling like they have a purpose in the world, wanting to have a job that makes them feel more fulfilled, trying to amend relationships. But at the essence, it's all the same thing. People want to be happy. They want to feel connection. And it's one of the interesting things, as you said, it's not that by taking a plant, all of our problems go away. Some of our problems may go away. Whatever needs to be resolved, or whatever that intention we're coming with, that deeper sense, beyond the mind, but on that deep sense, why we're actually working with those plants. There's something that we all have a sense of what needs to be resolved. And those things can get resolved. If they didn't, no one would be doing this work. The proof is in the pudding. But one of the interesting things with this work is it's a common question, often like when I'm facilitating ayahuasca ceremonies, is people will say like, oh, well, you must have mastered ayahuasca now. It must be really easy for you. And if anything, it's the exact opposite. at a certain level, yes, it may be easier. Like if I go to that place that I'm familiar with, like anything, it's going to be easier. Like anything we do, the more we familiarize ourselves with something, the easier it gets. But I mean, you could use any metaphor. It's like playing the piano. Like, are you able to play Happy Birthday? Yeah, of course. After you play that a while, it's going to be easy. And then is playing Happy Birthday easier? Yes, it's easier. But then what if you want to play something more complex, and then you want to play Mozart or Bach? It actually becomes increasingly more difficult. The things that have been resolved, or the familiarities, are easier. But these things are always going to take us deeper. And that depth is really up to each person. Like, how deep do we want to go? And many people are content with whatever it is they're looking for. That's, maybe resolving a certain trauma, resolving a relationship they had, finding something that gives them purpose. And then that thing has been resolved, and maybe they don't need plants anymore. But ultimately, depending on how deep we want to go, those challenges are ultimately going to become more difficult. I've worked with special forces people, Navy SEALs, who, this medicine has humbled them. These are people who really, for the most part, don't have fear. And yet, until we really lift that veil up and are willing to go very deeply, this medicine, these medicines can humble us all. I don't care who you are. If you have that desire to experience creation, it's why I always find it funny where people are like, oh, well, I want enlightenment. It's like, are you sure you really want that? Because that's going to be a hell of a journey. Are you ready to experience infinity, infinite creation, infinite manifestation? Everything is gone. There's nothing to hold on to. Who you think you are is shattered. Everything you think you think is real is gone. I don't care who you are. That is going to be a hell of a challenge for anyone. But we, not all of us want that too, and a lot of these things, it's like evolution, even within our own individual lives, we're all evolving. There's a time and a place for everything. And it's really, where in someone's life are they at? And hopefully, these practices, these medicines are bringing us to a place of resolve in where we're at in our lives right now. But depending on how deep we want to go, those challenges, yes, are going to get more difficult. So yeah, anyone who says, I'm good, I have no problems, everything is good, probably not true. Because that's also getting away from the actual, I think, teaching of any of these traditions, not just plant traditions, but this idea of me being separate. And when we say something like, I'm good, I'm permanently good, it's antithetical to these teachings, because it's enforcing that separation, that I'm somehow separate. And that, in the future, I'm going to be good, whereas we have no idea what the future is going to bring. All we can truly speak about is right now. Like, how am I in this moment? And that could be good. It could be not good. But that's all we can know. And that's the only place we can work with. So, yeah, hopefully that kind of answered your question.
Yeah, you did. Thank you. And I know we're coming to the end of our conversation. I've got a couple of things that I would like you to speak to. And so one of them is, I heard from one of your previous conversations, you talked about you resisted the ayahuasca experience for a while. You didn't just jump on the opportunity because there is this belief that everything is inside of me. Why should I need to take anything from outside? And this has been now something that I'm observing. It's coming up a lot, actually, in the communities, especially spiritual communities, where they say everything is inside of you. You don't need anything from outside. What are your thoughts? I would like to hear your insights.
Yes, in an ultimate sense, that's true. But that would also be true in an ultimate sense, meaning you were in a bubble and you had absolutely no access to any stimuli, to your own thoughts, to your own movements. And that's just not reality. Everything we do to some degree is taking what's coming from the outside and transmuting that internally. So, people say, oh, well, I'm sitting in meditation. I'm not taking anything from the outside. Well, we are taking something from the outside. We're even, where do our thoughts come from? Does that come from the inside? Does it come from the outside? What is our consciousness? Is that something from within? Is it something from without? All of these concepts in a way begin to break down. And I think the fascinating thing about, if we're talking about plants, for example, is they contain things that we already have inside of us. They're already endogenous to us. And I think that's why people are drawn to things like meditation or yoga, is because it activates those very same things. So it's just simply, it's a different path of creating the same thing. But no, we have to do something. We're human beings, and yet the beingness is only made manifest through action. So no one can just sit there and be in a complete void. Everything we do has some sort of impact. And these esoteric traditions, if we want to call it that, all of these things were tools. Of course, we don't need plant medicine. We don't need yoga. We don't need meditation. But that's also just saying, it's also defining something in form. It's like saying we don't need food. Well, we do need food. We need water. We need air. We need human connection. These are things that it's what it means to be a human being. And I think so many of these cultures saw that these plants, for example, are tremendously powerful tools that can aid us in the process of what it means to be a human being. And so, I think a lot of that, while it comes from a good place, it's actually a resistance to going deeper into what it means to be a human being. This may trigger some people, but interestingly, some of the more difficult people I've worked with have been kind of long-term meditative practice people. Because there's actually often what I see is there's tremendous resistance to fully go into life. There's this almost like a block of, well, everything I need is within me. But that cuts out so much of the world. And actually, part of that process is allowing things to come in. And if we can't do that, then we end up stuck. We end up suffering. So in an ultimate sense, do we need anything? That's for someone else to answer. But it seems like, of course, we do need things. There are things that are fundamental to being a human being. And I think a lot of these practices, like plants, were tremendously powerful tools that helped people to be better human beings. And if we disregard that, then it's our own suffering in a sense that we have to deal with. In the same way, if we said, well, I don't need food because all of the energy is within me. Maybe, if you can do that, great. But I think to disregard, thousands, if not potentially hundreds of thousands of years of wisdom of these people who are saying, like, this is a fundamental part of what it means to be a human. Like, this is medicine. This helps us to be more whole, to fully love life. Then to throw that out as if it's unnecessary seems maybe arrogant in the least.
Yeah, I love that. Beautiful. Coming from a more kind of scientific and holistic background, I always, we used to have these conversations with the curanderitas that I used to work with. And there was a conversation we had where she said, even though, say, for example, there are retreats happening all over Europe. And that's something I'm going to ask you also just after this quickly. And if I can squeeze that question in, whether it's better to experience these medicines in their land, like in the jungle, or how is the effects, because a lot of European retreats are available now. People are, carrying the medicine all over the world. And again, coming back to this conversation quickly, just because, we're having a retreat in the middle of, say, city, and the people who are processing these experiences and awakening to their own essence, and maybe tomorrow they will start to carry a different energy, and they will go home and that energy will remain with them. And like I said, coming from a holistic background, I do acknowledge that we are nervous systems talking to each other. So my nervous system communicates with yours. There is this there is no language there. There's energetic continued communication. And she says, yeah, they'll receive some of that. Doesn't matter if they don't attend the ceremony. So you are actually now becoming this carrier of the energy. So I think these are beautiful concepts. And one thing I wanted to just squeeze in is that when people always come to me with, I don't need anything from outside, I always say, sometimes you need something to crack you open because of these conditionings, these layers, these, it's like, we're like, onion, we've got to keep peeling those layers. And sometimes, like you said earlier, the walls are so thick, so strong, that we need something to just crack those open and bring them down so we can finally see what we are. And then we don't need anything, right? Because it could be the initial, metaphorically cracking us open type of thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's a very good question as to, are these plants more efficacious outside of their natural environment, or less, I guess so. It's a difficult question. I mean, you're coming from London. In England, there's a huge culture of drinking tea. Tea doesn't grow in the UK, at least not to my knowledge. And yet there's a tremendous enjoyment of it. There's a tremendous learning from it. Tea is also psychoactive. A lot of people don't think that. Certainly with the dosing, it's, people aren't having huge experiences, but they drink it because it's changing them. It's changing how they feel, how they're thinking. It's opening them. It's calming them, or maybe even stimulating something within. So that's a beautiful thing. And I think, like anything, it's, can we find ways to make these things sustainable, to carry on the traditions? And I would imagine even with tea, a lot of that was observing how tea was traditionally taken. There's a ceremony around it. There's a time, there's a place, there's a ritual. So with these plants, it's inevitable that they're going to begin to spread. It's part of nature. A bird takes a seed and flies a few kilometers, a few hundred, a few thousand kilometers, and it moves too. And maybe it can grow, maybe it can't. We as humans, we also transport things. So there's a beauty in it moving and spreading. And I think it's a balance. Can we honor the roots of where it came from? Can we work within those ways? Can we take that and incorporate it? And is it a sustainable practice? And it may be in the long term that it's not. It may be that it is. I don't know. That's where I think where human innovation also comes in. Maybe we can make it sustainable. Maybe ultimately it's not. But as you said, maybe by it getting out and changing so many people, it becomes something that we don't need as much, or we're able to take the essence and not necessarily the form. So we can take the essence of what it is and begin to apply it to wherever we are. Dieting, for example, plants that exist where we are, using that same philosophy, using the same practices to take the essence of that work and bring it to where we are. Maybe it's working with mushrooms. Maybe it's not really working with any super psychoactive plant, but local things. The practices, you mentioned like this idea of fasting, of meditation. That's a traditional Amazonian practice. That's what the dieta is. When you ingest a plant, you're isolated, you're fasting, and you're meditating because there's nothing else to do. There's no books, there's no nothing. Mm-hmm. So, these practices are universal. And so I think it's ultimately the more we can take the beauty of all of these practices and then again, as you said, begin to apply them to our lives and find a way that's uniquely ours, but that's honoring the tradition, that's keeping the essence and beginning to apply it to our lives. Because, for sure, if you're a single mother in London, good luck taking 3 months to go do a dieta in the Amazon. Probably not going to happen. But is there someone there who can potentially help you to do that same thing in a way that's maybe conducive for you to be able to do that? And so, yeah, I think in that way, as we share, we can begin to create the earth that we're all looking for, something that is conducive to all human beings, honoring traditions from all over the world, honoring traditions from the Amazon, honoring traditions from England, honoring traditions from, wherever, all over the world. And a teacher I have, Amika, says it really beautifully. It's taking the medicine from the four directions and not saying that one is any better than any of the others. Like they're all beautiful. We all have tradition. We all have medicine. And how do we take that and create a new maloka, a new ceremonial space? And, the maloka is really, it's the traditional Amazonian house ceremonial space, but it's a microcosm for the world. How do we take that and create a new world where we honor all of these things and we work together to create something beautiful?
Amazing. Yeah, that's a perfect way to finish our conversation. But before I let you go, could you just tell us about your project with the Universe Within podcast? Of course, I will be adding the links. And are you enjoying it? And what are what's the mission behind it? And if you can just quickly tell us about that before we let you go.
Yeah, it was something I had thought about for a long time, creating, because to some degree, that's how I began to learn was through this medium of podcasts and beginning to learn more, not just about plants, but just life in general. And I think it's an amazing time we live in that, essentially we have access to all of this information. When I started working, it was something that I wanted to do, but I was living in the Amazon. The internet is not good, to say the least. It has gotten better where I am, but it really just wasn't feasible. And more than anything, I was working so much that I couldn't find the time. With the whole pandemic thing that happened, I found myself with a lot of time because tourism shut down. Most of this work here in Peru shut down. And it just kind of came up like, hey, now is the time to do it. And it's actually one of the things that made me leave the jungle. And right now I'm in the more mountainous area of Peru, where the signal is at least a little bit better, and I can actually do it. But the idea was really to give voice to the people who are really kind of on the ground doing this work, because I saw, like, as you said, obviously this work is spreading very rapidly, and that has its good and it also has its bad. And I think part of the downside of that was there was a lot of voices of people who really weren't so engrossed in this work. They had maybe had an experience or different people speaking of it, but in a way that I felt wasn't necessarily so grounded or speaking from my experience of like what the essence of this work actually was. Of course, like we can talk to elves and see aliens and, all of that is great. But for me and the people I work with, that's not the essence of what this work is pointing towards. So the idea was really to give these people voice, the curanderos, the healers, the guides, the facilitators, the teachers, the people who are really doing this work, so that they have a voice, so that as this work does get out, there's hopefully some wisdom that can be shared that allows this work to go out in a more holistic way, and to really help people in their journey, because when I started, there was very little information out there, and that can be a bit difficult, because it's like, it's like, what am I doing? Now there's much more information, but again, that can be a little challenging too, because it's like, how do I decipher what's real and what's not? So yeah, it's really just to hopefully help people, and to help them to learn, and to hear from the people who are really either have roots in these traditions, or who have really kind of dedicated their lives to it.
Beautiful, beautiful. Thank you for such an amazing work. And I love that you have chosen to give voice to those people who are on the grounds working, and really coming from their perspective, because you said it's true, on social media or YouTube, we see a lot of people sharing their own experiences, maybe just a one-off experience, but we never get to see these real people who are daily in the middle of these processes, and holding the spaces, and also doing the work themselves. It's such a great project. Thank you so much.
And thank you, because I think you're doing the same thing, and giving voice to those people, and bringing this work out in a really beautiful and holistic way. So I think we can all use more of that, and so thank you for your work too. It's very important.
Jason, gratitude, and collaborations are beautiful, and slowly we are creating the world that we're seeking and we're hoping. Thank you again, and I'm sure we'll have you back for a second part somehow in the future, and really looking forward, and thank you so much. All the best.
That'd be great. I'd be happy to come back. Thank you, Susan.
Amazing. Thank you everybody for tuning in. Please do get in touch with Jason and myself for any questions. Do comment, and see you guys on the next one. Bye for now. Much love. Thank you so much for joining us. Psychedelic Conversations Podcast is designed to educate, inform, and expand awareness. For more information, please head over to psychedelicconversations.com. You can also share with your friends or leave a review so that we can reach more people. You can also join us in our private Facebook group to keep the conversation going. This show is for information purposes only, and it is not intended to provide mental health or medical advice. Thanks for listening.